Support WrestleTalk!
Give us a subscribe.
What is going on with CM Punk and AEW? I am Luco and DAD. This is Tempest. We are 2/3 of the Blackpool Content Club here on the WrestleTalk Podcast. Thank you so much for clicking on this video because, peeling back the curtain somewhat, Tempest, this is the third time we've attempted to record this video.
Sure is.
Because on Wednesday, we recorded the episode as we normally would. I say normally would, it's only our second week of doing it. But we recorded the episode and we talked about the NXT and NXT UK situation coming off the back of Heatwave. And then, Wednesday evening, we were like, yeah, that's pretty good. We're set to go in that on Friday. Then, Dynamite happens. And all the CM Punk stuff happens on that episode. And they announced that they're doing the John Moxley Punk match on next week's episode of Dynamite. So you and I, Pete's not here, by the way, which is why it's just the two of us. So but you and I said, right, well, we need to talk about this because that's the big talking point of the week. So we recorded an extra bit to go in front of the NXT stuff. And then Thursday evening, this report comes out about CM Punk, and WWE announced that NXT UK is effectively closing down and going on hiatus, which made everything that we'd recorded basically redundant.
Yeah, it sure did.
So,
this is why we try different things, and sometimes pre-recording a podcast doesn't work.
Yeah.
And then sometimes we have to do it the day of. But it's just another chance for me to sit and talk with you.
Oh, which is always a lovely thing to do, isn't it? Yeah, even though today has been a terrible day for us to come in because of train strikes and stuff.
I hate this city.
The city's fine, it's just that we've got a bit of an issue at the moment. And, let's not get into any of that. Anywho, so let's dive into all of the CM Punk stuff. Maybe we'll get into the NXT UK stuff as well, because I think there's a lot of interest. Like, they've released 20 wrestlers from their NXT UK contracts. So maybe we'll dive into that as well. But first off, let's dive into this CM Punk stuff. So on Dynamite, Punk cut this promo against John Moxley to set up their match at All Out. But at the start of that promo, he called out Hangman Page. And he had this line about the apology needs to be as loud. I can't remember the exact quote he said, but he said, basically he wanted a big public and loud apology from Hangman Page. And he said, what you're doing there isn't cowboy-esque, it's coward-esque. And it came out shortly thereafter, the episode, a couple of hours later, from Dave Meltzer on Wrestling Observer Radio, that CM Punk was not supposed to call out Hangman Page. He went off script, as much of a script there is. He was meant to go out there and call out John Moxley, but he went against the script and also called out Hangman Page. That report has now been backed up by Fightful, Sean Ross Sapp over at Fightful, and it stems from a promo, the promo wars that Hangman Page and Punk had leading up to their Double or Nothing title match, where Page kind of and Sean's tidied up his report because he got some of his dates slightly mixed up. I mean, Bix kind of said, I don't think these promos line up. But it essentially boils down to CM Punk was upset at some of the wording that Page used in their promos because he felt like he was sort of alluding to the Colt Cabana situation, or how CM Punk is not particularly well liked in the locker room, or he is protecting the company from CM Punk and all this sort of stuff. And that's why Punk did what he did on Dynamite. He knew that Page wouldn't be able to come out. He knew that he would be able to make one of their top baby faces look like an asshole and look like a coward as a receipt for all of the stuff that Page did in his promos leading up to Double or Nothing.
Boy, it's spicy, isn't it?
And also, I would say, pretty stupid.
Yeah. I mean, it's wrestling, yeah.
This is major league dumb stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, it's also very intriguing, and I'm sure will lead to another pay-per-view match unless something else happens. But I don't know, it adds a lot of intrigue into the product right now. Maybe not the intrigue that you hope to manufacture with great storytelling and everything, but it does kind of blur lines, and it's wacky for sure.
It's very wacky.
Still trying to figure out what to make of all this.
Yeah, so Punk like the way that Sean writes about this in the Fightful report, go subscribe to Fightful Select, by the way, said the Fightful were told by several within AEW that they felt the situation that unfolded on the episode of Dynamite was, quote, unfair, end quote, to Hangman Page if he wasn't aware of it. One said, quote, even if he was aware of it, what would he have done? Charged to the ring past Tony Khan, interrupted a promo he knew he wasn't supposed to be a part of. There was no way Hangman could have won in that situation, end quote. We're told Hangman Page was in the building, but haven't heard that he responded in any particular way. Those that we spoke to said that Hangman isn't a confrontational person and is generally well liked among the roster.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the case. Like, this was a no-win situation. Like, the only winner in this scenario is CM Punk.
Yeah.
Because Punk is the one that's in control. Punk has made one of the biggest babyfaces on the roster look like a coward. Now, you could argue that's bad business. And that's not a great look for AEW. It's not a great look for Page. And in a way, it's not a great look for Punk either. And I don't know, outside of personal beliefs, what you've achieved out of this.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's the people that will watch Dynamite and not necessarily check Twitter or check Fightful Select or check any of these reports that'll just watch that and be like, oh, well, yeah, you've made Hangman Page look like a geek, you know, and not dive into, oh, it wasn't scripted or it wasn't part of the plan or whatnot. Maybe those people have a bit of a different reaction to this, but yeah, I keep getting brought back to, I think CM Punk did an interview with like Sam Roberts back in like 2013, and he'd said that Vince McMahon told him that he was the hardest wrestler to deal with after Shawn Michaels. And there's a lot of comparisons to be made between CM Punk and 90s Shawn Michaels, for better and for worse. And I like, wrestlers are going to have attitudes, and there's a lot of very nice wrestlers and everything, but there's also some wrestlers that'll do this sort of thing. And I mean, it's not like a secret that, you know, CM Punk has been less than popular at times with people. You know, he's been hard to work with certain people. So, I mean, it doesn't really surprise me that much.
No.
I think a lot of people that are getting up in arms about this and being like, oh, Triple H is right. Punk only cares about himself. It's like, they just like anytime some negative CM Punk news come out so that they can just tweet out that one video of a 20-second clip of a promo that was 10 years ago or something. But I don't know. I think it could lead to good business. Because again, I think this could just be something where the people involved will get over it and then probably go on to make even more money in a bigger match. I don't know that that's going to happen, but that would be my guess.
Yeah, it's like, I went back and I watched all the promos that Page and Punk had. Like the ones they had in ring together and the one that Page did on his own.
Mm-hmm.
And really, like, I don't think that Page said anything that was massively outlined. Maybe there was more like coded words in there that we sort of like the Joe Schmo public wouldn't have picked up on. But it's not like he was name-dropping Colt Cabana. Like, obviously, there's the connections that Cabana's part of the Dark Order, and Page has got connections with the Dark Order as well. But, like, it wasn't like he went out there and was like, you screwed over Colt Cabana during the lawsuit and stuff. Like, there wasn't anything like that. Really, you watch the Eddie Kingston promo, and that's way more fiery against Punk and Punk as a person than anything that Page said in any of his stuff.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I went back and rewatched them again, just kind of looking like, did I miss something here?
Exactly.
Where did this kind of come from? And I really couldn't find it. So I am, again, just sort of at a loss at where all this has sort of come from. Like, I don't know. I've seen a lot of people trying to look at this from more of like a work perspective. Like, well, what is the purpose of this line in a promo? And it's like, well, Hangman Page hasn't been involved in the AEW World Championship scene in a few months, basically since losing the title. Maybe this is a way to like, oh, put his name fresh in people's mind in regards to the AEW Championship situation. And yeah, that would make sense if it was sort of like a more planned out thing. But otherwise, I'm just totally at a loss.
Yeah, and this is what Sean wrote here. Sources familiar with the situation claim that CM Punk has often verbally expressed his displeasure about things, including recently so blatantly that he thought they might end up quitting the company. Those to him said that he might have almost decided to stay home instead of coming to this week's episode of Dynamite, but don't think he would have quit. We haven't been given any indication that he plans on leaving AEW, but one veteran said that they've heard of threats being levied. Now, Sean he puts an edit and an update saying that any aggregating websites stating that Punk, quote, threatened to quit do not reflect this report. Any saying that Punk threatened to not show up because of the months-old issues do not reflect this report. We don't have any information or know definitively what led to that. As far as who didn't know the Hangman aspect of the promo was coming, no staff were aware of it happening. We're also told Hangman was supposedly unaware as well. So, Sean is saying that nothing in this report is saying that Punk threatened to quit AEW over the Hangman Page promos or anything like that. But there are, like, he does write in this that, you know, one veteran has said that threats were being levied, that he has shown displeasure, kind of stemming from the Hangman Page promo and presumably from other stuff that's happened as well.
Yeah. I mean, this is not the bit where I want to speculate about what is CM Punk upset about. But you look back over the last year or so, and I'm like, trying to find where the bits are going to come from that would cause something like this. You know? And maybe you would think if he was having promo battles every week that were like the Eddie Kingston one, where it was like, you could tell these guys kind of don't like each other, but are working it and everything. But if he routinely is having these shots sent at him, maybe that would be grating after a while. But I mean, I don't really see it. I don't know where it's coming from.
It's amazing, isn't it? Like, almost every feud that he has had in AEW has had some form of, like, you're difficult in the locker room. And, like, you know, we did that interview with Eddie Kingston, and there was part of me that I just couldn't tell whether it was work or shoot. I think it was always a shoot. Like, Eddie was like, I don't like the guy. And I think because Eddie Kingston is such a, like, he wears his heart on his sleeve, I was like, yeah, he doesn't like Bryan Danielson. He doesn't like Claudio. He doesn't like Punk because he's got his close circle of friends, and that's the guy that Eddie is. But there's been all of these promos and stuff levied against Punk, and you go back and watch all of these shoot interviews from back in the day, that sort of like mid to late 2000s, the early 2010s and stuff, before podcasts became a thing, where people would openly talk about, man, CM Punk was really difficult in a Ring of Honor locker room. Man, CM Punk was really difficult in an OVW locker room. Man, CM Punk was really difficult in a WWE locker room. And you're like, maybe when you put it all together, maybe he's just a difficult person to be around. And he is, we just did a WrestleTalk Extra. It's out next Wednesday over on our Patreon page. And Ollie and I are reviewing SummerSlam 05, which is the Hogan-Michaels one. And that was a situation where they had planned to do 3 matches, and then Hogan said no, so Sean pitched 2, and then Hogan said, I'll only do 2 if I get to win both. And then it came down to just being like Hogan versus Michaels doing 1 match. But Hogan's side of things said that after the first match, maybe I want to do a second match. But then Sean cut that promo on Raw the following night where he was making fun of me, and my feelings got hurt. And Hogan quit WCW because his feelings got hurt because Vince Russo called him bald on Bash at the Beach 2000. And Shawn Michaels on the Inside of the Ropes tour that he did with Kenny was just like, you know, wrestlers have got frail egos. A lot of wrestlers, like the biggest stars in this industry, have got really, really frail egos, and they're very easy to hurt. Maybe Punk is just one of those guys that's got a frail ego, that if you say anything bad against him, he really just takes it to heart.
It could be.
Could be.
Like, as I get older and all of this becomes just, like, much less important, I do just kind of look at it as like, well, can I blame any of them, really? I mean, you think about what CM... Now, granted, this CM Punk thing, you know, all the examples that you just listed with Ring of Honor and OVW, I mean, you keep going back to, like, you know, IWA Mid-South and, you know, quitting that promotion because his friend was treated poorly and stuff like that. Like, CM Punk's always been CM Punk, but his last 10 years have been kind of especially troublesome and very tiring, I'd have to imagine.
Oh, yeah.
So as I get older, the more I just kind of look at this, like, yeah, there's a lot of people that I kind of don't have patience for, but at the same time, if it's something like this, I'm like, well, they are all human, you know, at the bottom line of it. Like, just because you're on TV, I don't think means you have to have like a bulletproof ego and bulletproof feelings and whatnot. Now, Hogan quitting a company because he was called bald and
And,
everything.
and suing said company.
And
as well.
suing said company. I mean, you could sue Vince Russo. I'm not going to be upset about that.
No.
But I think that's like on one side of the spectrum. And maybe we'll find out what all this is like kind of more about from Punk's side of things at some point. Maybe not. But I don't know. I find it just difficult to generalize everything. Because again, we don't know the whole picture on this one. It just does kind of look like a bad look for old Phil.
It does give it like, and it's. I think this comes as part of the package of being a CM Punk fan.
Absolutely.
Outside of Ollie Davis, I can't think of a person who was more excited to see Punk back in the ring than myself, because I was stoked. And I know we were all really excited, but like from a personal perspective, I was like, I could not wait. Like I was there when Ollie was in tears. We were all in tears when CM Punk came back, and I was so excited. But part of being that Punk fan is the excitement, but also the apprehension of like, all right, but when are the wheels going to come off here? Because it ain't going to take long. And as we've seen here, but what, about a year? And the wheels are starting to, the cracks are starting to show, the wheels are coming off, and we are getting the CM Punk heat that I suppose we were all expecting to come. But I think part of us were like, I know this for me personally, I did think, I don't think it's going to happen this time. This is a new Punk. He's been away for 7 years. He's had time to reflect. This is going to be a very different CM Punk. As it turns out, nope. He's still Phil. He's still human. He's still fallible. And this is just the way that it is. If you bring CM Punk into your company, these are the things you got to deal with.
Yes. And where I have more of an issue with this is and again, not what it's stated in the reports, but the speculation or whatnot that CM Punk could have potentially quit the company at some point, or threatened to quit the company or whatnot.
Like
some
threats were levied.
Sure.
Let's use Sean's words.
Some scenario in which CM Punk doesn't show up for something. Whatever that is where it gets particularly interesting.
Oh yeah,
for me. You know,
particularly because they announced the title match for next week, not for All Out. Like the lost episode, which we'll call it, of Blackpool Content Club, which we recorded yesterday. The pair of us were just sat here just trying to fathom why this was booked. And there must be some big plan. Turns out, like, I mean, this is what Sean wrote. Let me just find where it is. Here we go. Fightful were also told that the Moxley Punk match for the episode, the 24th of August episode of AEW... Crikey. I'll try that again. I'll put my teeth in. Fightful were told that the Moxley vs. Punk match for the August 24th episode of AEW Dynamite was a late decision. We haven't been told how late, and when we asked AEW higher-ups for context, we didn't gain any. We haven't learned the crux of what led to Punk's current frustrations that would lead to him being hypothetically not showing up at Dynamite, whether it be a change in the match, Hangman's jab back in May, or otherwise. So, is there a scenario in which Tony Khan has moved the match forward, do it now, give Mox the win, and give Punk some time off?
I think that is entirely possible.
I think it kind of is now.
This report, like, again, we don't know what the plan is for next week, but if we could not for the life of us come up with like a viable option for why this is happening, like a justifiable option for why you'd move it off the pay-per-view, move it up to next week. There must be some other plan at All Out. Maybe MJF shows up. Maybe they do the Tanahashi match. Maybe they do an hour draw and then go to a rematch with a stip.
Like, we were comparing it to Goldberg-Hogan.
Right.
I'm just like, why would you do this on free TV when it's one of the biggest pay-per-view options you have?
This is all of a sudden a puzzle piece that fits.
Exactly.
It doesn't necessarily make the full picture.
Nope.
But all of a sudden it's like,
you're going through all the puzzle
maybe.
pieces. You find this one, you're like, aha, that's the piece I was looking for. And that's why we've re-recorded this episode, because this report answers a lot of the questions that we had yesterday. And I do see a scenario in which Mox wins the title next week, and Punk, which would be insane as well, because Punk's literally just had time off. He's literally had time off for his injury. But Or maybe Punk just wins next week. Maybe it's a case of Punk, like, if threats were being levied, I am using big Bucky O'Hare ears for any of our podcast listeners, threats were being levied. Tony Khan's like, okay, cool. You win the title next week, and we can just move on to something else.
Could be.
Could be that as well. Like, he's using his leverage. Because, let's be honest, if you're CM Punk, you've got all the cards here.
He's got a lot of leverage.
He's got so much leverage. Do you know why? Because Tony Khan sat next to CM Punk at many press conferences, pointed at him and said, this is the reason why my company is successful. If you're CM Punk, you're just like, well, cool. I'll take all of these cards then.
Gonna add another decimal point onto the next contract.
Exactly. This is all the ammunition I need to play any backstage politics that I want. If I want to play any creative control, I'll be like, hey, dude, without me, your company isn't successful. Those are your words. So let's do things my way.
Could be. There are, again, still many directions that they could go with all of this, because in the whole turn a shoot into a work and figure that out, boy, would a heel CM Punk be interesting in today's day and age, wouldn't he?
And it sort of babyfaces Page a lot off the back of this. If you manage to turn this, if you manage to work this shoot into a work, there is, like you mentioned earlier, like there's potentially money to be made off there in a Punk Page rematch. Like, I'd have been interested in a Punk Page rematch anyway, and I really did like the story that Page started to tell towards the end of the build towards Double or Nothing, which is that I'm protecting AEW from you. And I like the idea of using that, like that's the heel turn that Punk needs, that he was just in it for the money, which is part of Moxley's promo on Dynamite this past week. But you're right, like a heel Punk. Heel Punk is infinitely more interesting than babyface Punk. I love babyface Punk, but heel Punk is infinitely more interesting. And so, yeah, there's, like, actually, the MJF situation is a shoot that they turned into a work. That was like, and like, we'll get into the work shoot side of this in just a second, I suppose. But that was a shoot moment. He no-showed a signing. It messed up the date. It lost them money. They then did the angle at Double or Nothing, and then he got his promo, and somewhere between him not showing up and that promo on Dynamite, conversations were had that turned it from a shoot into a work, and now we are part of a work storyline. Every chance that this shoot moment with CM Punk calling out Hangman Page, knowing that he can't come out and being able to call him a coward, can be turned into a work and build some money down the line.
Could be.
Could be.
Like, and now it gets into like, well, here's the weird speculation wrestling side of it, because the gears start turning and I start fantasy booking all of this. And what happens if MJF comes back and he references the promo that Punk cut in like February, where he was like, talking about, can you look yourself in the mirror and say that you are a good person? And your answer at the time was, I'm trying. Yeah. I'm not saying that he is or he isn't or anything like that, but that is so much ammunition for storytelling. And if they're able to, I think the only way that this doesn't get turned into a storyline is if, like, Punk quits.
Yeah, that's it, right? Like, because I think Tony's a smart enough guy to kind of build this. I just hope that Tony is also smart enough of a man to make this not... Because, like, the problem with Brett and Shawn in the late 90s is that Vince McMahon used their real-life animosity against each other to make the matches more... I mean, actually, to be fair, when I look back at it, I don't know what he was trying to achieve.
If they had just promoted Survivor Series as what it was, it'd be the biggest pay-per-view in WWE history. This guy's leaving, and he won't lose to the other guy. And you can't say that, but like, hey guys, these two, something's gonna happen.
But what the point I'm trying to get to is that, like, Vince knew that Brett hated Shawn and they were having difficulties. And he knew that Shawn hated Brett and they were having difficulties. And rather than sit them down and be like, let's work this out, what he was doing was just stoking the fires, going up to Brett, being like, hey, pal, do you know what Shawn said about you? Then going up to Shawn and being like, hey, pal, do you know what Brett said about you? So the point when they legit had a fight backstage and Brett pulled some of Shawn's hair out. And then Shawn cried about it. And then blah-de-blah-de-blah. We get to Survivor Series and you get the Montreal Screwjob. Vince McMahon was a terrible promoter in that situation. I hope that Tony Khan could be a smarter person than that and not stoke the fires between the two of them and just let's work some of this out so we don't have situations like what happened on Wednesday that we can actually use and turn this into a work. Because this is what Brian Alvarez had to say about this on Wrestling Observer Live. This promo has split the locker room. That's never a good thing.
No.
That's not a good thing. You need a united front. You don't want a split locker room. This is what he said. The gist of it is, Hangman was upset with CM Punk, and he used that as part of his promo to build up the pay-per-view, that being Double or Nothing. Punk was very angry about that, and he's been angry about it ever since, so he came out and he did what he did. Punk wants Hangman to apologize for that promo. This has nothing to do with storyline. He went into business for himself. Hangman is supposed to be the babyface here, and Punk made babyface Page look like a coward. There were plenty of people backstage furious at CM Punk because Hangman is a well-liked guy. Everyone loves Hangman, and they felt bad for him, and they were upset with Punk. Now, of course, Punk has friends as well, and he has supporters. His supporters are angry because they believe that Hangman was the one that started all of this, so why is CM Punk taking all of the heat when Hangman is the guy that started the whole thing? I know it's wrestling, I know that people think that everything is a work or that this is an MJF deal. I'm telling you, I've talked to so many people, it's not. This is a real situation.
God, wrestling is just high school, isn't it?
Isn't it just? Like, you read that and you're like, guys, grow up.
He
Like,
started
grow.
it.
That's exactly it. It's what I would have said about my brother when I was a child. Like, don't chat at me, mum. He started this.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what we got here. Grown-ass men, adults, being like, no, he started it. Well, I think Punk did the right thing going out there. No, Hangman's right. CM Punk, he's the right guy. And you split your locker room. You need to find a way to bring all of these boys together.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah, maybe
because,
not.
I mean, you know, as you go onward throughout AEW's history, I mean, the wide-eyed optimism for was like, oh, it's the promised land, everything's going to be better, all the locker rooms going to be so happy because they're all being used well. As long as that goes on, that's not going to last, just in general. There are going to be frustrations and whatnot, but you don't want it to be an issue where all of a sudden it is like an us against them, click against BSK, really tumultuous locker room type deal. You don't want that.
No.
You can have people being frustrated with different things.
Not everyone could be friends.
Not everyone can be friends. Not everyone's going to be happy at all times. But an issue like this could become worse as it develops.
It snowballs.
Yeah.
That's why I brought up Brett and Sean earlier, because you don't want a situation to boil over into that and split your locker room.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, I mean, Punk's deal that he said on his promo on Dynamite is that the apology has to be public. So if that is CM Punk's stance, the way that we move past this situation is if Hangman apologizes for what he said in a public setting on an episode of Dynamite, I guess. Is that the way that we're going to... How do you figure that into a storyline?
How do you do that? How do you send your top babyface to the ring to apologize after getting punked out on TV?
Literally and figuratively. Like, that's a bizarre thing. I don't know how you do that.
Mm-hmm.
But that is clearly what Punk wants. That is clearly Punk's full stop underlining of this.
Because if this was just a wrestling angle, if this was a wrestling angle, you'd send Hangman Page out there and he'd cut the promos like, yeah, I'm sorry for hurting your feelings. Yeah, and do like the disingenuous apology. You do that, he will quit. I don't know that, but like, I don't think that would make the situation better.
No, it's not. No, and it brings
options are limited, man.
And so it brings up the conversation of, is this a work? Like, because that is everyone's answer to every situation that happens within wrestling. Because wrestling fans don't want to be worked, or they don't want to be the person. And I'm not saying this is a blanket term for every wrestling fan, but there are a group of wrestling fans and wrestlers, I'm going to add to this scenario, that don't want to be worked.
Absolutely.
They want to be the smartest person in the room. To his dying day, Scott Hall will tell you, or would have told you, Montreal was a work.
Mm-hmm.
You sit down Kevin Nash and you ask him now, he will tell you that Montreal is a work. It's not. and it's categorically proven that it wasn't a work because it led to nothing. But they don't want to be the people that... Because if it then came out that it was a work, they can be the smartest people in the room. They could be like, told you it was a work, man. Like, I knew all along it was a work, man. And if this turns out to be a work, there's those group of wrestling fans who'd be like, I didn't get worked because I'm smarter than the average wrestling fan. So it's built this kind of thing where there's a group of wrestling fans that don't want to be worked or don't appear to want to be worked. But as far as we can tell... everything around this and the MJF situation that everyone believed that was a work as well, you always got to ask yourself what question. to what end? Because if the MJF situation was a work, a terrible work it was. Because you know who ended up looking real bad off the back of this? AEW, MJF, and Wardlow.
Yeah.
Wardlow's run and the end of his 2-year storyline with MJF was completely bollocksed because of a quote-unquote work. And he's not really recovered from that since. He didn't get the big Batista push off the back of it because the match that happened at Double or Nothing was what it was. And everything was just focused around MJF. And MJF's promo afterwards completely overshadowed everything. So that work achieved nothing if it was a work, which is why it wasn't a work. It was a shoot. That's then become a work since.
Right.
But it hasn't helped Wardlow in any stance. I don't know who this helps either, because it sure as hell doesn't help Hangman Page.
No.
It sure as hell doesn't help Punk versus Moxley for next week. So to what end would this have been a work?
Right. I think it's just the general answer for the reasons that you gave as to why everyone's like, nah, it's a work, because everything in wrestling has to be a work. Yeah. And my answer to this, because I don't want to be worked, except when I do. My answer to that is just I give no opinions about the MJF situation until it's resolved. Until we get some tell-all podcast in like 5 years, I'm like, I refuse to be worked. I'm not saying a thing about it.
All I can tell you is I've seen the plane ticket.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing.
Whether or not he was going to get on that plane or whether or not he might have just bought the plane ticket, all I know is I have seen with my own eyes the plane tickets.
Right.
That I know is legit true.
As in regards to that, and then by extension this, I think again that this is a shoot situation that hopefully, if tempers can be quelled and everybody can get on the same page, that this will be turned into a work and they will make money.
Yeah.
Ideally, that's the scenario.
Which is what they're hoping with MJF as well.
Exactly. And with the MJF situation, there was a lot of talk. I know Dave Meltzer said a lot at the time that there are those who look at MJF as like, well, he's this generation's Brian Pillman, where you don't know where the work and the shoot start and stop. And that's where it gets really interesting, and it's a big old gray area that's very fun to talk about, but yeah, when the internet wrestling culture now is just, it's a work. It's really tough to find the line and point to it. It's like, well, that's where it was real. That's where it became a work and everything. And this is, I think, going to be a very similar situation, because you can skim through that Hangman Page promo and be like, where did it happen? Where are the nexus events that led this to this event? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. But it is a bizarre situation that we find ourselves in, and it meant that I don't know whether or not, and Sean said that he's not sure either whether the title match being brought forward 2 weeks to free TV has anything to do with all of this. But I've got to feel that it has. I have to think so, because there's no other reason, unless of course we watch next week's episode and there's some big thing that happened and you're like, that's why you did it.
We got worked.
We got worked, brother. And do you know what?
That's great.
I say this every single time. If I got worked, great! That's wonderful! It's the point of wrestling is to work me.
Exactly.
We're marks.
We don't want to know what's happening. I want to be surprised.
Being worked is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
That's a brilliant thing. That means I sat here for an hour talking with one of my favorite people in the world, talking about this, it's a real thing. Good. That's great. Also, it means if we get worked brilliantly, and I've got to be honest here, and this is completely upfront and honest, when there are situations like this, as a channel, we do much better because people are interested to know what is going on. So the more that companies can do great quote-unquote works like this, brilliant. It raises all ships. I'm happy on all sides.
I've seen so many people say that 2022 has been the return of kayfabe. And it's a different sort of kayfabe where, back in the day, it's just people just believed that it was real. They treated everything as if it was a real fight and real angles, real storylines, real characters and everything. But this is where you got to introduce them to a little bit of real and then start to pull it back into the work aspect, which is what Jerry Jarrett did all the time in Tennessee. So shout out to Jerry Jarrett, founder of TNA.
I was going to say, one of the only few people. Actually, no, Jerry's one of the smarter people. Actually,
Yeah.
Jerry was the smartest person when it came to TNA, really.
Yeah.
Because Jerry's idea of TNA was like, let's not hire all the idiots that closed down WCW. And then his son Jeff was like, well, I know what I'll do. Hires Vince Russo and all the idiots that closed down WCW.
But yeah, they always said like Jerry Jarrett was a master of showing you points A, B, and C are all true. They're all real. You know them to be real. You know them to be true. But then D is not true. But you go, well, A, B, and C were true, so maybe D. And that's where the kayfabe gets worked in with things. And that's what leads to people not being sure what's real and what's not. And they can get invested and they can be worked. This feels like that. You keep showing people things that are real and true, and you tell them that they're real and true, and then it continues on and it starts getting maybe a little bit less real and true, but it started that way, and you can get invested, and it's more interesting, it's more intriguing. I think it's good for the business as long as it leads to something. As long as it proves that, you know, all of this was for a point. It wasn't just doing it for the sake of like, whoa, pop the rating for that MJF promo, you know, because that's not enough. It needs to accomplish something. And I hope that all of these things can accomplish something. Yeah. I really do.
As long as you find a way to turn this into a work.
Yeah.
Like that's the key to this. Where we said earlier, so if you can take that moment and turn it into a work, brilliant. It's dollars and cents. That's a great thing to do. If it boils under and it becomes something else and it leads to one of them leaving, then it was all for naught, and it was a bad thing. But yeah, it's certainly an interesting. I mean, I'm super excited to watch. I mean, I was excited to watch next week's episode anyway, and I don't know if like this story has made me more excited to watch next week's episode because I was already like so intrigued. But I am massively intrigued to see what happens next week.
I'm gonna be so interested. There's some possibility that like CM Punk will come out and get booed. I don't know how many people in the crowd, like
crowd reaction to this.
How many people are going to know all of this? It is kind of inside baseball, but
the AEW audience, though, I've got to think is like 90% inside baseball.
They are smarter than the average bear.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. There's a really interesting direction that this could go just based off of the reaction, both from the company and from the crowd. And it just makes me want to tune in to see it. Now, of course, as I said in the Lost episode and my conversation that I had on the AEW podcast with Adam yesterday.
Which was very good, by the way. You can watch that.
Thank you very much. And I've lost my point immediately.
Sorry.
As I said on the AEW podcast yesterday, ... I'm very excited to see this thing, but I like the title match being next week. And I was very excited to see it, but in more of like a watching through closed fingers, I hope they don't break it, children running around with a knife in their hand sort of way. Where it's not the, ooh, I can't wait for the next step in the story. I can't wait to see Kenny Omega and Hangman Page against FTR because I know something's going to happen and I don't know what, but whatever it is, it's going to be a good direction for this story. This is like, I really hope this isn't one of those times that you look back on and be like, and that's where it went wrong.
And that's where it all went nipples north.
Yeah.
Because you can do that with WCW. There are a handful of moments during the, like, you know, a 3-year period where you can be like, and that's where things, that is where one wheel fell off.
Yep.
That's where another wheel fell off. There's your third, and there's your fourth.
Yeah.
And actually, I mean, there's probably multiple wheels. They had like, you know, big 18.
Yeah, it was like an 18-wheeler.
Wheels that were falling off. Like every couple of weeks on Nitro. Oh, there's another wheel.
Yeah. Every 32-man double elimination tournament, another wheel comes off. You lose the spare out of the back.
Every Vince Russo reset button. Every Nick Patrick not being able to do a fast count. Every Hogan backstage body thing. And all of these wheels just falling off everywhere. Oh, there's an interesting podcast to be had there.
Yes, there is.
That I think most people have already done. I just wanted to do one myself because I want an excuse to go back and rewatch all of like 98, 99, 2000 WCW and read all the observers and be like, and this is where this fell apart.
Yep. This is the moment that WCW not quite died, but got a little bit more sick.
Got a little bit more dead. Death by 1,000 backstage incidents. Lastly, we're going to quickly discuss the NXT UK situation because we did the first podcast we did, this the first take of this, It was off the back of Heatwave, where 5 people from NXT debuted. You had Gallus show up. Probably a good thing that episode does go up because we just buried Gallus for an hour.
Yeah, we sure did.
We were real mean about Gallus. And Tyler Bates showed up with the WWE United Kingdom Championship, a title that, in continuity, he hasn't won yet. And Blair Davenport, the former Bea Priestley, also showed up on the episode. We went into a bit of speculation station. I went full out, and I was like, this is the end of NXT UK. This brand is dead.
You were about half right.
I was about half right, because I'd seen some other things, like BT, where they'd filmed at the BT Sports Centre. They'd cancelled all the upcoming tapings that they had for them, and there were no other tapings announced. PW Insider had said that maybe they'll do them in Orlando. I made the joke about the news. What a great way for a UK-centric product to be filmed in Orlando.
Yep.
And I'd seen a couple of things as well that led me to believe that the company was not being pushed or promoted, not even by BT Sport, which is the home of NXT UK. And as it turns out, I was more or less half right, because they announced that NXT UK is going to be, they've rebadged it, you fool, to NXT Europe. NXT UK is going on hiatus. They're not going to be doing any tapings until the following year, and they've renamed it to NXT Europe.
So they're trying to put WXW out of business now.
Which they were already. Just like, well, now we kind of partially own them, brother. Like, might as well just close them down. Close down a bunch of UK indies. Why not shut down some of the European ones as well?
Mm-hmm.
It looks like Triple H is back on his global localization wagon again that he was trying to do a handful of years ago with NXT Japan and NXT Saudi Arabia. NXT UK was the first step of that. He wants to do NXT Mexico. Maybe this is the first stage of global localization 2.0.
Maybe. It's really hard for me to gauge any of this, because you look at NXT UK now and it'd be like, okay, it didn't work. It accomplished their goal of putting World of Sport out of business, but
it's the only reason that WOS, and actually I don't know if NXT UK is fully to blame for the WOS thing, but like the whole reason NXT UK exists is because WOS got a really good TV deal with ITV, and that's the TV deal that WWE really wanted. They were desperate to get on ITV and could not get on that channel because ITV wanted WOS instead, and then when that didn't work, they opted for AEW instead.
Right, like. Maybe they didn't fire the gun, but they were standing there watching as World of Sport died, and they got what they wanted, So I don't know what more you can really look at for NXT UK, because it really didn't work, and people didn't watch it, and there were great matches and moments on it from time to time.
Walter Dragunov.
Walter Bate.
Walter A-Kid.
Yeah.
Mostly Walter matches.
Funny how that works. And I don't know if there's going to be any interest from the general WWE audience into an NXT Europe. Just there's not much interest in NXT in general at the moment. I know the rating went up for this week, which was good for NXT.
But it's a special episode.
It's a special episode, and just, again, many of the things that we talked about on that pre-recorded podcast that you'll never get to see now is what do you do with NXT? Because you can't necessarily sign the big free agent stars and have them show up in the crowd, and then they go to NXT and they have their 2-year run and they get to be North American champion, then NXT champion, then off to the main roster. Now, if you're going to sign with WWE, it needs to be incentivized that you're going to get a good contract and a good push and be in a good spot. Maybe not necessarily right away you need a good push, but I don't think any of the guys that could potentially be taken away from AEW, just for an example, I don't think you're going to sign them with the intentions of just putting them on NXT. So it then becomes, all right, who are you going to populate NXT Europe with? And who are you going to populate it with that people are going to have to tune in to see? Unfortunately, right now, I think that's a short list, and I don't really know what to make of NXT Europe just based off that.
I don't know either, because I found this news to be very interesting. My first instinct was they've just rebadged it, you fools. They're just renaming it because NXT UK is a dead brand. It's a dead identity and no one really cares about it. So we'll just rename it NXT Europe. We'll relaunch it. They've 2.0'd this, and we're just going to make it something else. And then they released a load of talent. And I'm like, well, okay. So
NXT 2K.
Very nice. But I was something like they've released like over 20 names, and I'm like, well, what is your idea then? Because you've already you've moved 5 of your biggest names across to NXT, and then you've released 20 people from NXT UK. So what is your whole plan for NXT Europe? Is it something that's got a TV show, or is it literally just a performance center type thing where you just go there and you just learn how to do the WWE style, and then maybe you can go over to NXT, and basically it's just training and performance camps around the continents and around various different continents and stuff, because they have a performance center here. We were invited to go down and look at it and do like a big video thing and interview some of the people down there. It hasn't really led to a whole great deal, but they had it and they built it. They had the plan. Now that Triple H, Stephanie, and Nick have got the powers, then maybe they're like, cool, let's revisit this and let's build these performance centers around the world. Let's not focus on trying to get them TV deals or anything like that. Let's instead just use them as training centers to funnel into NXT, which will then funnel into the main roster.
It's really odd, isn't it? It's really like, I don't know what that really accomplishes other than, okay, you can do your training from home before we send you over, as opposed to just, okay, we'll buy you the plane ticket first and then you can go to the performance center.
Which is interesting because part of the report around these names is that they were basically given options.
Mm-hmm.
You either move to Orlando or we release you.
Right.
So like maybe that's the deal of it. It's just like when they are signing up all of these new names and stuff, it's, giving them that option. It's like, sign you now and you can train at home, but at some point we will want you moving to Orlando and this and the other.
I don't know why. All right. Hey, whatever. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's really odd because there were some really not big names, but like names that I was surprised to see get released.
Trent Seven,
Flash Morgan Webster, and Mark Andrews. I was not expecting any of those.
Mark Andrews, I should have seen coming because Mark was doing a podcast for BBC Sounds. That was a WWE podcast, essentially. It was called like My Life in Wrestling or something. And it was him interviewing WWE talent.
Mm.
The last episode he posted was like around WrestleMania.
Right.
And I thought, man, it's weird that Mark hasn't done any episodes of this for a while. So should have seen this coming, really. And I think he probably knew that the writing was on the wall.
I think the writing's been on the wall for
a long time,
for like 2 years.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I mean, the list of names we've got, and it's funny as well because we're going to list off these names, and I would wager 98% of the people watching this have zero clue who any of these people are. And that is actually not on any of the wrestlers. That is on WWE themselves. Amir Jordan, Danny Luna, Dave Mastiff, Amelia McKenzie, Primate, Nina Samuels, Rohan Raja, Shah Samuel, Skid Scala, Trent Seven, Ashton Smith, Jake Stars, T-Bone, Theo Man, Flash Morgan Webster, Wild Boar, Kenny Williams, Amale, Mark Andrews, Zaya Brookside, Eddie Dennis, Saxton Huxley, and Sam Gradwell.
Shout out to Andy Datson for putting Millie McKenzie as one of the answers on Van Quizlemania last night. Took her hair and put it on Adam's body and had people guess. Not even a multiple choice option. Like you had to type in Millie McKenzie. I'd never heard Millie McKenzie's name.
Oh man, she was actually really popular in the UK indie scene, and that's actually one of the things that's going to infuriate me when discussing NXT UK down the line. We, as a country, once had the most thriving independent scene, and this company killed it. And I know there are people now, and I've heard some podcasts talking about these release names being like, thankfully, there's an independent scene for them to go work with. Let me tell you something. Ain't the independent scene there once was there. Progress can't sell out the ballroom these days. ICW aren't getting the crowds that they used to have. Because NXT UK, on purpose, I might add, killed the UK independent wrestling scene. And it is going to take years for it to recover. And I hate them for that. I really do hate them for that. Because there's people like, you name Millie McKenzie, years of her career have been squandered because of NXT UK. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of names on here that are young talent that could have been bigger names and would have been bigger names in the independent scene and making more money that were squandered. Much more money than it would have made in NXT UK as well, because the contracts that I've seen for NXT UK talent, they were making diddly dick money, making way less than, like minimum wage jobs they were making. And I am angry and so upset at what NXT UK has done to the British wrestling scene.
Hell yeah, brother. I mean, this is a podcast topic for a different day. But when Vince retired and everyone started going like, well, he made wrestling what it was today. I was like, you have no idea how much I would rather live in the timeline where Vince McMahon failed. And all the territories were allowed to thrive a little longer. And yeah, they would have died out like once television really took off, but would have been a much, much better wrestling scene for all involved other than just the one guy that made all the money. Yeah. It's the same thing. Vince McMahon monopolized wrestling in the United States, and then they wanted to monopolize wrestling in the UK.
And they did that.
They largely did that.
And failed at it, but they they succeeded and failed at the same time. They got everyone under contract and then did nothing with it.
Yeah. It pisses me off.
Pisses me off too, brother. So yeah, that is basically the stage that we are at with NXT UK which will now become NXT Europe. What that means for NXT 2.0, I guess, remains to be seen. They are doing a Worlds Collide show. It's remarkable that they've announced this Worlds Collide pay-per-view and then released like half of the names that would have appeared on that show.
The world that is colliding has 5 people from it.
But I guess that's what it is. Like the show will just be like B. Priestley versus Mandy Rose, Tyler Bate versus Bron Breakker, and Gallus versus whoever the tag champs are, like, or versus Diamond Mine or something.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Or maybe they'll bring hopefully Rampage will be on there, because Rampage wasn't one of the names that was released. That was the funny thing, actually, wasn't it? Like in the lost episode we did, we were going through all the names in NXT UK, and I was like, man, look at this talent that could get a shot. Look at this talent that could get a shot. All the names now outside of Rampage, all these talents have since been released. No
more British strong style coming in.
Trent is legit the one that surprises me the most.
Yeah.
When I interviewed Trent last year, or was it Crikey? Was it earlier this year? Might have been earlier this year. That was a guy who was so excited for the future of NXT UK. So excited. Could not speak more positively about the future of NXT UK and, possibly NXT and this and the other. And here he is now on the unemployed line. I feel bad for the guy. Feel real bad for the guy.
Yeah, I feel bad for everybody that signed being like really hopeful for their futures and everything. And I'm sure a bunch of them had very good times and they
were very positive locker room.
Yeah.
They were also some of these names. Shah Samuels was a guy that was brought in during the pandemic era.
Right.
So he was able to get work and get money when there wasn't really much work and money going on at that point.
Exactly.
So I can't take that away from them.
Right.
Shah, I like Shah, and I'm glad he got some money.
I'm glad that the people involved that had a good time were able to do that. I am also very disappointed for everybody that went in with very high hopes and then sat at a performance center for 5 years.
Because the people, when it first got announced they were doing NXT UK and WWE were doing that, I was on the Figure 4 boards. Will Campbell on there very, very eloquently said, this will be the death of the British independent wrestling scene, because there cannot be an independent wrestling scene with WWE in town. And he was proven right.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely 100% proven right. There were a bunch of people that saw this coming a mile off. And I feel bad for the people that fell for it. But anyway, I think that we'll draw this to a close. Thank you so much for watching this this bit of ramshackle version of
Take
3 version with only 2/3 of us here, because it's Pete's birthday today as well. So
happy birthday, Pete.
Everyone say happy birthday to Pete.
He didn't get to say, oh, it's my birthday when we recorded it to go out today. So now, happy birthday, Pete.
Pete even, when we finished, we went back to the office and Pete was like, oh man, I forgot to mention this episode goes out on my birthday. So we'll do it for you. Happy birthday, Chops. We'll see you again on Monday when you're back in the office. On Tuesday when you're back in the office.
You will.
But we will see you next week. In fact, Tempest, you'll see them tomorrow with the SmackDown review, so long as you can get in here. It may be one of those times we just do it as a remote podcast, because I did say in my channel update video that barring, we'll always be in studio unless there's apocalypse happenings, and there may be some train issues tomorrow, so maybe a remote thing, but we'll work out how it's going to happen. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Please do click the thumbs up button on this video, because it really helps us in the algorithm. Subscribe if you're new to this podcast and you enjoyed this chat. Download the audio version of this show over on all good, bad, and mediocre podcast platforms. And we will see you next time. Take care, everyone. I've been Luke Owen. Jam that jam. That's been Tempest.